El Analfabestia.
There is no worse cruelty than that of time, nor a tie more incoherent than inertia, but the one who reinvents himself within himself. He is capable of overcoming any spell.
That's what happens when it happens. You understand me. Life is that asphalt that we trample on at every crossroads, and every management that we make waters of the heart and the fires of the soul of others, or in the voice of our own perdition. I don't expect you to deduce the latter, but I still try to do so. I know that, in his turn and his votes, he commands a protocol bias and perhaps even conviction. However, I know you and understand you as an open, intelligent, and fair person. As I let you know in my previous message, these letters are not intended to be confessions seeking your absolution or even some penance you prescribed for me. I just want you to read with the best disposition and to evaluate my positions with regard to such a difficult juncture in which I find myself. If you like to take a dogmatic approach, then I understand, but if you can get rid of such a veil, I will be infinitely grateful. As I recall, in my first missive I also let her know that I see Eva twice a week, although I have been constantly calling her into her office. That's changing and I call her less now, but the encounters are more frequent per week. Last week we were together 5 times, and this week we are going at the same pace. You might think, so what does that have to do with it? And I'll just answer my hypothetical question, well, a lot, really a lot. Love, just as it is not bought, is not given away and has no title to property, as many think. Love is a bond, not an object or a scroll. It is not an imminent or definitive commitment, but rather a volatile link that waxes or wanes with life. What was yesterday is not so much today, or today it is dying. What happens to love tomorrow, not even love itself knows. So intricate are their designs that there is no way to prophesy them. The truth is that there isn't. Yesterday I said to Eva that it has been wise to let life change the nuances of love, taking nothing for granted. We both understand that we have to keep fighting to fade every inch of distance between our souls. Therefore, this is how we act and this is how we win at every crossroads. We play every day to reinvent our love, and this has allowed us to discover unexpected paths. It's as simple as that. We reinvent love. You know, love has to be reinvented from time to time. But this redefinition of love must be better and more complete each time. A love that stagnates is a love that subtracts. A love should be a growing spiral that doesn't steal your years and never a labyrinth of responsibilities and commitments. In that, Eva is a very good lover. I repeat, very good lover. If all women were like that, or half of them, this would be a better world, or at least a much happier one. Again, I recognize that this is not in accordance with their doctrines, but love knows no dogmas. With all due respect to you and your institution, love doesn't beat in institutions either. I understand that sometimes institutions use mechanisms of the soul and nature such as love for their own motives, but that's not really what I call loving. Because such an emotion has already been encoded in our organism long before we dared to admit it. Who knows, maybe long before we were born. But anyway, I'm writing to you this time motivated by something that you gave a lot of emphasis in your sermon on Sunday. I imagine that the emphatic way in which you dealt with the subject was motivated by the communications that I have left you. I was especially struck by the part where you compared many forms of what I call loving each other to aberrations or going against God's will. I am very sorry that you lend yourself to such official approaches, because I know that you do not share such reticence personally. In the car, on the way home, Mercedes tried to continue with the argument of the sermon, but I asked her to choose another topic of conversation. I don't think the conversation would have survived a couple of miles before we were bitter about what was left of that sunny day. I don't want that with her. What's more, I don't want any kind of disagreements with her because she's not a bad person. Rather, as I told you in another letter, sometimes people's souls live in separate worlds, even though their minds and bodies dwell in the same dwelling. Well, I hope you will take advantage of the donation I have left you this week and have a great time. By the way, I recommend that you reduce the cigarette a bit because you are almost losing your voice at the end of Massachusetts. See you on Sunday. Sincerely, the illiterate beast.
Father Marcos Urrutia was once again stranded in the middle of the side aisle of the parish of San Agustin de Tagaste. It was already the fourth time he had received such envelopes with a letter bordering on the heretical and €200 notes. The mysterious messages arrived in sealed envelopes with no senders or recipients. The letters were always begun with Dear Father Marcos and signed with that pseudonym so inflammatory to the restless clergyman. Twice the envelope was left in the offering chest, once in the mailbox of the parsonage and this time on the official side of the confessional. Father Marcos kept each letter after it had been read carefully to try to detect any threat or clue. These were impeccably written in black fountain pen ink with some calligraphic trim that gave it an air of Victorian elegance. Although they had many digressions in different directions, their prevalent theme was the elevation of a rapturous and mystical love in direct opposition to the conservative concepts professed by the Church. The father was not so disturbed that the author confessed his infidelity to his wife of decades with a mistress much younger and more energetic than she. However, it made his blood run cold that the brazen illiterate beast was one of the parishioners attending his Mass every Sunday, and he personally did not know who he was. On his way to his office, he again tried to predict that a mature, intelligent, wealthy man would be cynical and shrewd enough for such a charade. Mercedes and Eva were definitely false names, and there were no more than 24 men in the parish who fell into that category. He thought of Marcelino Valiente, the winemaker, but he was quickly discarded because of his poor education and that unfortunate handwriting that characterized him. Dr. Anibal Giraldo was also discarded because it was well known that he always had a floating population of 2 to 5 lovers. Why bother? He had to be a man in a life-changing way and with enough drive and dedication for such an adventure. Upon arriving at his office, Father Marcos proceeded to send an email to the archdiocese notifying them of the event. He immediately prepared a cover to send a copy of the letter by fax to the office of the Monsignor, who was in charge of such matters, which were apparently not uncommon. After following the established protocol, the father proceeded to open a drawer file from where he snooped around in the section assigned to the letter A. From there he took out a folder labeled Analfabestia. In it were the first 3 envelopes with his 3 letters and €600 undeposited. The 4th envelope and its euros were added to the collection. The following week, Father Marcos did not find any envelopes, and that surprised him rather than relieved him. He thought that week's envelope might have been found by some parishioner praying for a miracle. During the next 4 weeks he noticed that no envelopes had been found and desisted from sifting through the letters. Almost at the end of April, at the end of his last Sunday Mass, Mrs. Marietta Campos, a very devout woman, urged him to go to confession. Almost all of them had left the chapel when they both went to the confessional that awaited at the side of the old church. The confessional, which had more than 80 years of service, knew more about this ancient town than the more intrusive neighbor. Its African mahogany walls and cold darkness allowed for a degree of sinister medieval confidentiality. On the way to the cockpit, they both stomped softly as they dropped their gazes to the floor in a serenely solemn attitude. Mrs. Campos was the first to arrive and stand next to him. Without waiting for instructions, he knelt on the cushioned tablet provided for such sinners. A few steps behind, the father arrived, who subtly opened the curtain of his cubicle to almost infarct at the sinister scene of 3 white envelopes on his stool. The envelopes this time had 3 Roman numerals, 1, 2, and 3, on their faces and were perfectly aligned next to each other without touching. Father Marcos entered the dark place open-mouthed and with a certain trembling in his chest. Unbeknownst to her would-be confessor, she took the envelopes and slipped them into the secret pocket of her cassock. He immediately sat down on his stool and proceeded with the sacrament. After the customary prayers and crossovers, the woman, in a very pained tone, began to give a list of situations that weighed on her soul. To the parish priest's surprise, Mrs. Campos, the mother of adult children, confessed to him an episode of infidelity towards her husband. Despite the fact that the lady was a parishioner for years in San Agustin de Tagaste, the father could not locate who her husband was since she always arrived at the church with other ladies. The lady explained to the astonished father that she had been seeing another man for more than 2 years. Their clandestine rendezvous invariably happened whenever her husband went on business trips and sometimes on certain evenings when he stayed together. She never detailed who the object of their affair was, nor did her father elaborate on the matter. She pointed out, however, that despite the air of those evenings and the occasional romantic kiss, they had not yet consummated the carnal act. The father, though he felt some relief from it, knew that it was probably all a matter of time. After several exchanges, Father Marcos asked Dona Marietta to join the conjugal living group, which met every Friday night, as a penance and to bring her husband along the way. The lady consented to the appropriate penance, but did not guarantee that her husband would attend. Other penances were given, and the exoneration was not long in coming. The father quietly withdrew from the confessional, and the lady remained on her knees praying for a few more minutes. On the way to his office, the father hurriedly removed the envelopes from his cassock. Soon he opened the first envelope and took from it the customary donation and the handwritten letter.
Dear Father Mark, in a book by an exoteric guru named Osho, I read not so long ago the following: it doesn't matter if you are loved or criticized, respected, honored or defamed, crowned or crucified, because the greatest blessing there is in existence is to be yourself. Father, that's what I do. To be myself. That's why I'm not afraid. I'm a master. I don't tremble in the face of life. I live it. I am happy and imperfect in my purely natural love. In this way I harmonize in the infinite chaos and persuade the truth. Fertile, flowing, and compassionate. For some one more madman, but for my beloved, antonym of fear, soul, and freedom. Life is not black and white. It's not even the colors we imagine seeing it. Life belongs to the shades that we choose in each breath that it itself privileges us. Woe to me if one day I forget who I am and begin to act as others dictate to me. Woe to me if, instead of selecting love, I choose fear. Woe to me if I am content with expediency and thus misplace my freedom. Woe to me if, tied to a dogma, my soul begins to tremble in dread. And woe is me if, by pretending to be perfect, I deviate from the path to a much, much better universe. I don't know what's going to happen. That's the most beautiful thing of all. The mystery is very great and precious, which makes us draw back one veil after another, in search of the now in order to live it, as it is worth until death. When you live like this, dear Father Mark, the universe conspires in favor of creation. But not the creation of the 7 days, which you well know is a nice metaphor. I am talking about creation in which we are co-participants and guarantors. Yesterday I was making love to Eve early in the morning, or as I prefer to say, honoring her soul in my body and mine in hers. After the first miracle of the day, we hugged and I told him, Namaste Mamita. She squeezed me very hard and just said, that has changed our lives so much. And so it is. It has changed us so much that we could even change our names in honor of such a metamorphosis. I'm sure she'd love to be called Felicity, and I, for one, wouldn't hesitate to be baptized Graceful. By the way, I'm sorry I took a long time to write to you, but I was in very pressing business and personal matters. But I'm already writing to you, though I'll take it to you personally in a few weeks. For now, I'll dedicate myself to just that, to the now. Where I like to live and at the time that pleases me best, the here next to her. That is my nirvana, or perhaps in its nomenclature, my paradise. Before closing this letter and regarding Mercedes, she is very well. As a matter of fact, having a lot of fun with my primary partner in the company. We will call him here among us, Judas, to give him a name, even though for her he is simply her significant other. But I'm not jealous or hurt. It's been a long time since I've had room or time for such emotions. I have left them in the same void in which I left guilt and fear. Sincerely, the illiterate beast.
When he finished reading the first letter, the ecclesiastical man could not separate his last paragraph from the confession of Mrs. Campos, which was still hovering in his mind. The father then hurried to his office, where he opened the remaining 2 envelopes and found the usual letters with donations of €200 each. That section already totaled €1,400, and at least there was the possibility of knowing to whom to send an acknowledgement of receipt. However, there was no certainty of this, and his vast experience as a clergyman had taught him to distrust even evidence. Quickly and intrigued, he began to read the second message.
Dear Father Mark, did you know that, in the Vedic tradition, especially in the Tantric tradition, sex is one of the most effective mechanisms for validating communion between souls? This is so, not because tradition manifests it, but because millions of souls testify to it, and many more are about to experience it if they do not feel it right now. I'm not talking about having sex for the sake of having sex. They even sell that, you know. I'm talking about uniting 2 souls into one through that energy that is unleashed in the moments when we reveal ourselves to be divine from beasts. It is there that we open ourselves in the embers of desire to become infinite avatars, intermingling the flesh, the instincts, the feelings, and the pleasure with the eternal entity that we are in the love of the universe. We are eternal, Father Mark, we are eternal. We may not have the same opinion or beliefs, but we are one in that. As are all human souls, and many other souls of beings that inhabit the universe. Or do you think that all this space is simply to adorn our skies at night? Sex, like other natural processes, are taken advantage of by those who dwell behind the curtains of the body, and who reward us with that beautiful instinct that we know for love. Tantric sex is like the contemplative life led by some monks of their religion, but with many other wonders. Believe me, that one. Where 2 give themselves over to this search and detach themselves from their pasts, their faults and their fears, the sacred prevails in it and love vibrates. But such a love, even if it is magical, is not a perfect, eternal, or guaranteed love. That tantric love has to be endorsed, revalidated, nurtured, and cared for every day, as if it were a fragile creature. In this way, that bond between the souls will be strengthened until that place is created, where the space between the 2 is nothing more than a mirage. On the contrary, if we stop growing in that bond and interpose any subterfuge between those who have loved each other at one time, love will die and only a good friendship will remain. Dead love, or much of it, but not commitments, is a very arduous place in the lives of many couples of beings. Heartbreak is a silence between souls who have already stopped speaking to each other, even though they were once simply one. Today, I went shopping with Eva, and then we went to eat at a restaurant. During the whole time we were together, we were both thinking about the same thing. I want to go back to the room so we can make love to each other, body and soul. I want us to be one, and I want it intensely. I don't care if this lasts a lifetime, because the path to a lifetime is simply the now. When we came back like this, we both professed it, and now she sleeps while I write to you. Finally, Mercedes told me that she is going to go through confession next week. Treat her well. She's not a bad person, and she's also a devout Christian, which can't be said of me, thankfully. By the way, I'll be in town that day, so if you're reading me now, try to remember, I'll wear a black shirt, and I'll sit near the door at the entrance of the church. Quite possibly I'll be late, and I'll leave before it's over. Sincerely, the illiterate beast.
Father tried to remember the faces of that day at Mass, but to no avail. In addition, his eyesight was barely able to recognize faces in the first 5 rows from the pulpit. In any case, he could communicate with the illiterate beast through Dona Marietta or make his own inquiries and confront him directly with his company. Actually, Father Marcos couldn't decide whether to take him to the police or to uncork a bottle of wine with the daring curious. In addition, once the mystery was solved, those euros easily represented the payment of utilities for at least 4 months. The only thing that didn't sit well with the priest was why a person was able to put such energy into exposing such concepts, so foreign to a Catholic cleric. What was this man looking for with such a display of irreverence and daring? But he still had one letter left unread. Perhaps there was the answer, he thought, and proceeded to make way for it.
Dear Father Mark, do you know what namaste means? It is a word in Sanskrit, which in essence means mutual respect, but which, by its very exercise, takes on a meaning as broad as, I honor the place within you where the entire universe resides. I honor the place within you of love and light, of truth and peace. I honor the place within you where when you're in that spot of yours, and I'm in that spot of mine, we're just one. Don't wonder how all that fits into namaste. Don't even believe it, you have to live those things. That is why, when a being reaches that now, capable of unleashing a cosmic love for another being, the only thing that prevails is to live it and share it to the four winds. But the latter, more up to you, who have a much more relevant forum than mine, which is merely the distribution of seafood, and recently the tantric seminars and writing. When I took over as the illiterate beast a few months ago, it wasn't so clear what turn this would take. Today, after living the now given over to love, meditation, and a much more holistic life, I have found a better self in myself and someone like Eva, willing to walk with me. Honestly, I apologize if I have offended your sensibilities in any way, but when you live as I do, those details are subordinated to the substance. The illiterate beast represented in me the duality that emerges when we begin certain journeys or certain schools in this existence. Today the duality is practically vanished, as the fog vanishes when morning sets in. That happens to all of us, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It is quite possible that you went through a similar process during your ordination, of course. By the way, my name is Manolo. Manolo Bautista of Distribuidora Bautista and Salgado in the Plaza del Porta. I think that soon it will simply be Distribuidora Bautista, and I will go to operate from other perspectives on some Caribbean island that I have not yet decided. That's still a few months away, so if you like it and you're not upset with me, I'll see you whenever you prefer. For now, it only remains for me to tell you that you are very good at what you do, that this process has done me a great favor in spirit, and that frankly on my part, I made you a good man. Sincerely, Manuel Bautista, former illiterate beast.
At the end of the reading, Father Marcos remained reflecting for a few minutes on the whole adventure that was unfolding before his eyes. He still had a few traces of doubt and serious philosophical disagreements with the former illiterate beast, but now the uncomfortable uneasiness had dissipated. Without waiting any longer, he went to the file where he kept the file and took it with all his letters and his euros. In it he threw the new writings and stole the 800 euros. He placed the folder on the top of his desk and hurried to the chapel. As he passed the pulpit, he bowed, crossed himself, and, armed with a smile, climbed to the platform where there was a small vault embedded in the wall. Using his key, he opened it and removed the offering chest. That's where the 1,400 euros ended. Quickly, he returned to his office as he undressed his cassock. When he got there, he took the file with the envelopes and letters and put on a guayabera that hung in his executive chair. He hurriedly opened a shelf from which he seized 3 bottles of Marqués de Riscal Gran Reserva. He closed the shelf, locked his office, and walked out the side door of the parish church toward the Plaza del Porta, which was 5 blocks to the south.